beautiful people. You're listening to the Rewired Woman Podcast, where you can eavesdrop, like really, on our girly chat and learn the science behind our random questions and interests.
Join our conversations and follow us on Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Kat, and I am here with my inspirational and intentional co-host, Mads.
I love that one. Better than being called diabolical.
I meant it in a way that all of your other friends understood, but it did not fit the Google definition. Regardless, I feel like we've been a little bit less regular about our meetings. So I'm curious, what have you been up to? What are you up to? What are you doing?
I'm really excited to, you've inspired me to, for my whole entire next thing I'm going to do in my business. And I've been working on it the last 3 days, and I'm really excited.
What is it?
So based on our conversation, seems so obvious now, but it's really because of our conversation when we were getting ready to go to the coffee shop or whatever. And you were telling me how you were feeling frustrated with clothes in your body, but also you recognize logically that it's because of all of this content you're seeing with Ozempic and people being super, super skinny again. And realistically, you are happy, but you're also not. Yeah. And it just got me thinking about all of this and how much I've worked on this so much over the last 8 years and done so much, and I can feel myself, I think I told you that I can feel myself being oh my god, I have to do this thing, but if I take a step back, I don't actually want to do that. It's because of what I'm feeling about being perceived by other people and what that means. And so anyway, that's led me to, I'm what do I have expertise on and lived experience and is a problem and I feel people need help with right now and I can use my special set of skills for. So I'm going to make a new course around body neutrality through mindfulness.
Oh my god, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And what a good use of Ikigai.
Exactly. Thank you. I'm glad you also see that. That's why I do all my business stuff, right? I'm what do I actually like? What do I have experience in? What does the world need? And I think especially going into New Year's and everyone getting served even more, now's the time to change your body and start preparing for summer. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I saw something on the news a few weeks ago that the Trump administration changed stuff. So Ozempic and things are going to be cheaper starting in the new year. So yeah, which is whole other thing. But yeah, I just feel now is the time. And what I want to be really careful of, it's funny, this sounds like a sales pitch almost, but I'm more just telling you because I'm so excited and I've been working on it so much the last 3 days. But what I want to be really careful of, and I think is really important, is I want to create a space it's actually not about your weight or what you look like. And if you want to lose weight, that's totally fine. Because I think sometimes in body positivity movements, and we're even seeing now, right? A lot of people that got their following from being fat or plus size or losing weight and people are mad at them. So I think it's really important to, one, body neutrality and body positivity are actually vastly different concepts. And in academic research, they're very different. So that's part of what I've been learning. They're also different brain circuits. So that'd be a really fun thing for us to look into sometime. And so I think body neutrality is where I'm going to start. And then I was going to say, that it's not about actually whenever you reach true body neutrality, you're actually more likely to be nice to your body and eat healthier and exercise, which I think makes sense intuitively. All of us have experience, but you're mad and then you overeat or something. So anyway, it's going to not be what you actually look like. I'm not going to target it 2 plus size women or anything. It's going to be really about just not seeing your body as your worth, not seeing yourself as an object, but as a function to exert what you want on the life you want.
Yeah. And I think, when you say the difference between body neutrality and body positivity, I'm hearing body positivity can also resemble like toxic positivity, where like, you know, it's positive to be plus size and things. Cause I remember when that was kind of a narrative in society, it can be excluding, right, for any body. And body neutrality is more like it's about you, your body, whatever it looks like. And just like, even if you want to make changes to it, kind of, I guess I don't know what body neutrality is. You'll have to tell me. But body positivity feels very like, no, like you shouldn't change. Like you need to just feel good the way you are. And that's not always realistic.
Yeah.
And
that's like exactly what the research was saying is like, and I want to be clear. I actually think there is a case, and to me, it's kind of almost like the healing journey. Like I think long term, and I don't know, this is going to be something I have to keep researching and try out, but in my mind, it's almost like body neutrality is the path to eventually feeling body positivity. I also think that's a hot take though, based on the research. And I think it's like almost like we've talked about like spiritual bypassing. So I think it's kind of the same thing of like, if you are coming from this like place that's really dark, or like you've had a lot of depression or anxiety, just bypassing all of it and be like, everything is great and I'm really happy and everything is awesome. Like trying to just like high vibe it, right? Like that spiritual bypassing, like that is eventually going to cause a real problem because you haven't actually changed the core beliefs and you're just like pretending that those things aren't there anymore, which like I know we've all been there. Mm-hmm. And I feel like skipping right to body positivity is almost the same thing, where it's like just trying to be like, I love my body and I'm beautiful no matter what I look like. But like most people don't actually believe that. And it's not like it's not realistic. It can be actually more harmful, but I don't think that means it's not possible and that it's always a negative consequence. But I think that it's like and not just me, the research shows, and this is what actually convinced me, is that the research shows body neutrality is much more effective and is more realistic, because it's basically the idea that you are seeing yourself for function and not for being viewed as like an object, basically.
Or others' perspectives.
Yeah, the focus. I can actually pull up my research. I have like a lot. I actually was pleasantly surprised, to be honest, how much research there actually was around body positivity, body neutrality, self-image, self-appreciation, self-satisfaction. Like all this stuff is really cool. But anyway, I just wanted you to know that you in our conversations really inspired me to take this next step.
That's awesome. I have had more conversations with people about it that I work with, because I think, I mean, it's just very ubiquitous right now. And I have even seen it so ubiquitous that men around me are starting to diet. And like yesterday we had a work luncheon, and the person who brought us lunch brought us Olive Garden, and it's like all pasta, and how many people were talking about like, oh, this isn't in my diet, and like somebody's fasting. And then like my father-in-law is just kind of like being more conscious of like what he eats, and like was kind of like, oh, like he ate a smaller portion than he normally does, and like ate like a big salad and a smaller portion of dinner, and like was unsure about eating dessert. And I was like, oh my God, like this is so ubiquitous right now that like even men are feeling it, where they're like, oh, like I should be very cognizant of what I look like, because, and I think this comes from, like we talked about, like a hyper conservative narrative in society creates more of these old narratives of what you look like and how you're perceived matters a lot. And I always take things politically as of lately, but like politically, it's very much like your worth is to fit into a box, because like that's kind of what not actual like governmental economic conservatism, but like what conservative views have become is like there is a normal, there is a good, and like if you do not fit into that perception, then you will be outcasted or punished socially until you get with the program.
Yeah.
or disregarded, devalued. So I think that's great. And like, if you want to tell me about I've never heard the term body neutrality. So if you want to tell me more about that, that would be enlightening.
Awesome. Yeah, I did actually pull it up. I already have, what is this? 22 pages of notes to support my new course. Because you know me, I over research. This is a total side note, but I feel like it's very fitting for this particular thing. And it's funny to me, I think. It just shows, I feel like you were the same way, maybe not. But I remember this one time in high school, but we were supposed to bring, I think I may have actually told you this before because it was about the spanking. It was like a child development psych class, and we had like a Socratic seminar around like thinking like for or against, and Arkansas. So I'm not kidding. Like I promise I can be hyperbolic, but I'm not being hyperbolic when I say in this high school class of 30 people, I was the only person that said that spanking should not be used as a form of discipline for children. Everyone else in the entire class said that it was that they should happen, right? Like it was good. And like their argument basically for why it was good is because like they were spanked and they were fine. Which I have some other thoughts about that. But the funny part here is that like we were supposed to bring like research to support our argument, of course. I don't think anybody else even brought anything. I brought like 10 papers to support my argument. And yeah, that's where I could be a little over the top. But I just remember them being like, I was like, I can't even listen to you because you're just telling your opinion and I have research. A little bit of
I think we're very research heavy people. And this is okay, so you don't know this because you left, but Greg and his dad, right before Greg's dad left, and this happened last time too. So Greg comes in and we're making dinner and his dad isn't there. And he's like, I want to ask my dad about how he feels about some of the stuff going on politically. But I'm scared to because it's getting more to the point where like, okay, how do you not see this? And so he's like, I want to ask him about some of these like very obvious things that I don't think align with his morals or the morals he gave me, but I'm scared about what it might reveal about him, or, if he has views that I don't feel super great about and how that would like affect our relationship, or I'm just scared to find out what he's going to say. And I was like, I mean, I understand that. And like, I think that means you already kind of know, but like, I don't feel the need to have those kinds of conversations if I feel like they're not going to be productive. And like, I've worked really, really hard to like your parents, despite knowing our, different perspectives on the world. And, he's of the same age as the first Black woman to have gone to an all-white elementary school. Like they're not but 5 years, 10 years apart, right? So like people are to some extent a makeup of their environment, and like he's always lived in a very rural area and like hasn't branched out a lot. And I mean, I hear what he says, like just don't ask. Like we know. And
like it doesn't need to be acknowledged by saying it out loud.
No, but he got into a screaming match with his dad. And like last time his dad visited, they did the same thing. But this time, Greg, was talking to his dad and they were yelling at each other. And I guess bad things were said back and forth. And he yesterday had kind of created this like long email full of like very nonpartisan research that he like ice his own numbers, like very much things that he was like, my dad could not say, like this is just liberal media propaganda or whatever. Like, this is stuff that he would find a reputable source in, like, you know, the whole 9 yards. Did a lot to find like very externally valid and internally valid points. And he like drafted up this whole email, and he was like, I was going to send it to my dad, but I didn't. I sent it to myself instead, because it was just one of those things where like the other side isn't really fighting with fact. They're not really interested in research. If they were, they would do it. It's a very emotional argument. And I was like, that's why I don't argue, because I know I'm emotional. And like, even if it is based in fact, sometimes I can get very emotional when it comes to politics specifically. But we're very research heavy. The whole point of that was to say, like, if there's a topic and we care about it, like, we will be like researching it and like bring it to the table to be like, how could you tell me I'm wrong? And like Greg had essentially done that nights before, and it didn't make a difference.
Yeah.
He was just like, I'm really disappointed. Like, my dad, you know, it couldn't have gone worse.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, like, that's a shame. You know, how are you feeling about that? Just kind of like listening. And then we went to work. And then yesterday night, he told me, you know, like, I didn't tell you everything that had transpired, but my dad apologized to me. And I was like, well, what was he apologizing for? And he was like, well, I didn't tell you, but this is what happened. And so I don't know how he's feeling about it. I think he's feeling, you know, his dad apologized and essentially said, like, next time we'll have to agree to only talk about things we agree on. And Greg was like, I don't know if it's still as important to him as it is to me that, like, we're able to disagree and to like talk about things we don't agree on, and like bring research to the forefront and have these conversations where, you know, we're like fully open to each other's sides. Cause like me and Greg had talked about how I was like, do you think that he truly has lost his moral compass, that he truly feels this way, or that he's in some sort of
like echo chamber of white?
Yeah, exactly, like propaganda bubble? And he was like, definitely a propaganda bubble. And I was like, okay, well then, like, you know, and he
not lost.
Yeah, and he was like, well, I think he feels like I'm in a propaganda bubble. And I was like, well, that's exactly, I mean, I don't think anybody's wrong in that. Like, we kind of are. But Greg, I'm definitely in a propaganda bubble. Greg tries really hard not to be. So I'm in like a very left kind of propaganda bubble, and I try to like dim that down because it's absolutely gut-wrenchingly depressing. And Greg's in a, you know, or Greg's dad is in a, you know, Fox News bubble. And Greg is like trying to be somewhere in the middle, and like the middle happens to be like pretty objectively like Fox News isn't right. The left is dramatic, but also based in fact, and the way they present it can just be so polarizing that it's really hard to get anybody from the right to feel like what they're arguing is factual. Like, it all still feels very emotional, and like an emotional attack on them and who they are. So I thought it was better that like Greg had that conversation, because he doesn't feel like, he didn't attack his dad in any way. You know, he wasn't like, you're racist. He was like, the things you are saying right now are racist.
Like, they are racist. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
it's not, this isn't even like we go back to like the weight thing, you know, and there's like a lot of literature around even like thinness as an ideal is like rooted in racism. And like, I mean, I think we're both on board that that is true. And like, I would like learning about that is really eye-opening. And I can see on the surface where people are like, that's not true. But when we start to go into like, brown people literally don't have the same rights as white people. You can't even like be like, I'm not racist. That's not true.
yeah. And I have like coworkers that they're not like big Trump supporters, but that generation so badly wants to feel like they healed all of that, or like it does, like it went away so quickly. And it's like, it didn't, and the fact that you want to pretend that that is like the problem, you know? They're like,
realized, not to cut you off, but I'm
No,
like,
yeah.
it's literally full circle to what we were talking about with like spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity. Because this is like one of the philosophy classes I took. I've definitely told you about it. The Enigma of Evil and Suffering. It like literally broke my brain. That's the one where like it was only 7 people in every class. Like people would leave just like chain smoking for like, and I left and threw up one time. Like this class was really not, it was not fun. But one of the things we talked about and like one of the things we explored was how after the Holocaust, you know, Germany has taken really, you know, radical, some people say like responsibility, and like the way that they talk about it and teach about it and have memorialized the victims, and like they don't let you forget. Like you're in Germany and like there's no forgetting or pretending like it didn't happen or, you know, brushing it under the table. It's like right in your face to be like, this is what happened and like this is why we have to take responsibility and learn from it and like never let something like this happen again. And it's like America, right? The United States, we never did anything like that. We've always just been like, oh, what? The Civil War wasn't even about slavery. We just like totally circumvent and like pretend like it didn't happen, didn't go away. And in that way, it's like spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity because it's like never healing. It's not acknowledging or taking accountability or reparations or healing any of the things that happened. And now it's all just like crumbling apart.
Yeah, and I think people are so scared. Like we talked about this. We're so scared to mess up that we can't have these conversations. And because of that, I think people are so scared of being called racist that they're not really willing to look at the fact that, like, me as a white person, in order to go fully through all of my personal healing shadow work, we're not even talking about like being a better person societally, just to like deal with my own shadows. Like I do have to acknowledge that like I grew up in a system, like I said before, like I'm a product of my environment, and I grew up in a system that has all these narratives that are fat phobic, homophobic, you know, racist. And if I'm not willing to look at and acknowledge how that shows up in me, and I'm going to be like, oh no, like that's not me, then I'm part of the problem. And I think people are so scared of just like admitting that, like, even if it shows up as like white guilt or whatever it shows up as, like it's there. And if you refuse to look at it, it will always be there and actually becomes more problematic if you're not willing to own up to your individual as a reflection of the collective you grew up in, right? Like it's not that I like was born and chose to be that way, but I grew up in a society and I went to a school where there was 3 Black people. Like even if it was in a like more urbanized area than rural Pennsylvania, it's just like, and it's not to say that I want to feel that way, but I can't not feel that way until I look at it.
Well, also it's like you might not even, not you specifically, just like the royal, is that what it's called? The royal you, the collective you of that. You might not even know you feel that way because it's so normalized. Like it's not like this feeling of like we've talked about before, even like going back to the fat phobia stuff, which I feel like is on everyone's mind right now, right? You might not even be someone that's like, oh, like you look at someone bigger and be like, oh, they're revolting, right? You might, and like, you know, you might, but a lot of people might not have that direct of a thought and be like, I'm not fat phobic. But then what? They spend their entire lives yo-yo dieting so that they're not over the size 8, and they're like mean to themselves. And so it's like it's still rooted in this. And I think that's helps illustrate these points, like you're saying, is like you can't truly know yourself and hold love for yourself and others like if you're not willing to look at the deep core beliefs that are running the decisions of your life.
Yeah
And it's not always so obvious, is like I hate those people, or I don't like those people, I don't respect them. It shows up because it's so normalized.
Yeah, and there's a lot of covert stuff happening in American culture, right? And that's why marginalized individuals are kind of like, this is a problem. And I think people who don't look at it themselves that's why they're so frustrated with it, is because that kind of goes against, like, they spend their whole lives trying to cover this stuff up and not deal with it and not address it. And so when, you know, vulnerable populations are kind of like, hey, this is still a problem, you still, whether you realize it or not, are covertly treating me differently. And they're gonna, they get defensive, or whoever gets defensive and is like, no, I'm not. How could you say that about me and my character? And it's like, it's not that you're a bad person or that you have bad intentions, but like, it is a fact of the world I live in. And unless you're willing to acknowledge that and acknowledge that you're a part of that, even if you don't, let's say you're not fat phobic, right? And you have a friend who constantly is, and you never correct them, or you just kind of, I don't know. There's just all these things, like when, the innate, some of these narratives that you don't even think about, the innate idea that like it's out of laziness, or it's out of like what it says about a person.
Like, I've been getting served, which makes me sick that this is what my algorithm has brought me to, but it's obviously because I'm watching it, because what is it? I hate watching. I'm like so revolted, but then I'm watching it, so now I'm getting more of it, which I don't like. But like all these like fitness bros that are, and like, or even like women too, that are like, if I'm gonna do a business deal and someone shows up and they're fat, I automatically can't even listen to what they say because they don't respect themselves. How can I respect them when they don't even respect themselves? And I'm like, how is this like circulating around the internet? And then this is kind of getting off topic, but yeah, like I told you, like that is, as a business owner, especially a health and wellness business owner, that's definitely something that deep in my mind, right? Where I'm like, oh, people assume that I'm not actually healthy and don't respect myself. And then I'm getting like these things of like people with massive followings, literally just saying that into the world.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. But okay, I don't want to forget this, and maybe it's too off topic. I actually love this episode and like kind of deep diving a lot of different ways. I think it's really pertinent and also gives us a lot of branching off points and to get feedback. And I know I brought this up to you last time I was with you, but I feel like this actually explains what we're talking about. That like the movie Promising Young Woman, which I know you've never watched, but you need to watch it. And it actually explores this in a really like just gut-wrenching way, but also really powerful. And it kind of ties into all these things we're talking about, where like if you refuse to look under the hood, right? The hood of like yourself and the society and the culture that you live in, it's almost like we're operating in different realities, and that you don't even know that you're part of the problem, which I know is kind of like what you're saying, but like, so specifically to put this around like sexual assault and like rape culture, like, which is obviously a huge problem. And like, it's like where we get into this like not all men thing. And like, when we look at the statistics of like, I'm just saying this off the top of my head, so I might be wrong, but I think it's like, what is it, like 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted, something like that. And right, it's like, how can almost, but I would argue every woman has had some encounter, even if it's not personally herself, like from a friend, right? Like pretty much every woman is like, has had a situation that was like not consensual, whether it was like all the way or not, something that was like inappropriate. And yeah, you talk to men and they're like, well, not me and not my friends and like that. And it's, I think what it is a actual lack of like not having agreement on like what sexual assault and rape is. So like when I'm going like going off like a total tangent, but it's almost like when you think of like teenagers, like I actually, because I had a lot of male friends in high school and college, like what we've talked about, and I've actually talked about this with them back then and also later in life. And it's almost like all the movies and all the things that they see, right? Especially like younger, sometimes like you don't have prefrontal cortex creation, finish, whatever. My words aren't even making sense. But like the media that they're seeing and the things that they learn about like consent and sexual activity and pursuing women is very much in the like, just keep trying. Right? Like you just like no doesn't mean no. Like that's just like what women say, and they want you to keep going after them.
So I had somebody, the person I dated when I was going into college, this. The story of his parents is his dad was like obsessed with his mom, and his mom continuously like would turn down advances from him and dates, and like he just kept trying and like essentially wore her down, right? And yeah, and I mean, I have so much to say on the way men view women, and I get groups of 40 or 50 men at a time, like, well, more like 35 men, for 30 days. And I've seen probably over 100 of them pass through my job. Okay. And these are men at low points in their life looking for help. And they get wrapped up in women, and they talk about how much that would make their life better. And I mean, the amount of views I see, like, of populations of people saying, like, the more a man talks about how much he needs a woman, the less he respects them. In my experience of seeing all these people come through, the more men are outwardly like, women are wonderful and I need them and they just make the world go round, the less actual humanization of women they have. Like, the less they see them as individual people, and the more they see them as trophies to be won, tools for success, a tool to escape loneliness, a medicine for their ailments, something that belongs to them and is useful to them and provides for them, and not as an individual with their own desires and thoughts and perspectives. And I guess when you're talking about men, like the culture of men and some of the things they say and like teach each other, right? If we're talking about holding each other accountable in society, when it comes to all things, but now we're talking about, men and how they treat women and rape culture. There's something my father-in-law does that I noticed that I never noticed before, where and I see it in older generations more than in younger generations, but I'm sure it's ubiquitous, but it's this idea that they sign off on people. And you see Trump do it all the time. Like, it means something. So it looks like when a guy's name is mentioned in a conversation, they go, "Oh, I know him. He's a good guy." And it's just like, that's like a sign off. Like, I have signed off that I know this person and they're of decent moral value. Now, the other night, he was doing this with somebody who, as far as I know, I don't know him, could be, right, a good person. And I spoke up to kind of give my input, and I've done that before, and it's completely like, okay, and they just move on.
Like, why the fuck are you talking?
Yes, exactly. Because apparently women's assessment of men is just in their mind so skewed and so wrong that the only person, it's like fucking banks and old timey shit where it's like, could you on behalf of this woman verify what she's saying is true?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, so like we've created this culture where men have the objective factual information apparently on like who's of good moral character and who isn't, right? And then they don't talk about sex with each other. Okay. And there's this idea that you wouldn't want to know if one of your friends was a monster in this way, because what would that say about me?
Yeah. I also think, like, I think that's accurate. And I think with the original thing I was trying to say there, though, is that I think that it's, and I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying, like, if we're like genuinely wanting to change and have a real conversation as a society, we can't, like, on individual levels, what am I trying to say? It's like I'm not trying to like say that they don't have like responsibility and accountability to take on individual levels, and socially and culturally and through the media and things that they're taught. I think it's almost like a skewed perception of like what normal is and like what a monster is. And it's like they don't see like what women are saying like is sexual assault or like is rape or is making them uncomfortable. They're like, oh, you just misread the situation. It wasn't like that. It was like this. Which is kind of what you were saying, right? That they're not believing our experience. But I almost think it's not even all the way to the level of like, I don't want to see it because I don't want to see that they're a monster. I think it's like, I see it and that's just like what it is to pursue a woman.
Yeah, I think.
Which that could also be my own really negative take though.
No, I think that is definitely an aspect of it. And I think that, I mean, a lot of media is made by men, first of all. And then second of all, even women will romanticize some of this stuff because it is in our culture. So then like we as women have to recognize where, nice guys in quotations, of course, will complain about this, right? Well, women only want men who treat them like shit and blah, 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 blah. And so I think that is something that, in media and socially can be much of a problem. But I guess like on an individual level, I'm thinking, this also relates to kind of like people who are emotionally attached to a certain political party where like even if you were presented with facts that what is happening, it kind of shatters your version of reality. Like you were saying, like we live in different versions of reality if we're not willing to like take that sort of personal accountability. And like the men who, are kind of like, well, not me, not my friends, because it would really hurt your ego because there's this sense of
A nice guy.
yeah, well, like also if I do bad things or if somebody does bad things or if I associate with bad people, then I'm a bad person. And like we're not acknowledging that some of this, now this is controversial for sure, but some of these behaviors are, trauma responses to other sexual assault, right? Like it's passed down in this like hush hush manner of like, I can't talk about it or no one will believe me. And how we act that out, right? Whether my dad did it to my sister, or my dad did it to me, or my uncle did it to me, or it's something that my dad did to other women and I noticed it, or my dad did to my mom, because you said 1 in 3 are sexually assaulted. 1 in 5 married women are experiencing marital rape, right? And it's this idea that, well, they're married, it can't be rape, right? That's not, it's her job, it's her obligation, well, or whatever the fuck, right? Like the whole Monica Lewinsky situation, they're like, well, that's Hillary Clinton's fault. Because if she was doing her job as a wife, then he wouldn't have been, like that stuff is fucking crazy.
That part of the problem and why all this is going on, right, is because we all are so scared to say the wrong things. And so we just don't talk about it, or we talk about it in like private conversations. And I think that we all need to start talking about this more like out loud and not being so scared to be like canceled or say the wrong thing or something really controversial, because the only way that it changes is to like talk about it and like have accountability and to learn. But before we go too far, one, I do want to correct, I did look it up. So it is 1 in 3 women globally experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. In the US, it's 1 in 4. So just to
okay, great.
put out the stats. I mean, either way, that's horrible. But I am curious just because like we are on this kind of like snorkel, like going through like all these different things, and I actually really like it. But what are your thoughts on this whole like nice guys don't capture women's attention and they only want the bad boys or stuff? Like what do you think is going on there? 1, do you think it's accurate? Or 2, why do you think that happens? I'd love to know like your thoughts on that.
Okay. There's a few things because there's so many. I don't want to generalize. Okay. So there's a few things. I mean, when we're talking about this, it makes me feel like we're talking about female desire. And like female desire is one of the most elusive things in the world. You and me talked a lot about like not understanding our own exact desire, right? And we were like rewatching Sex in the City, and it feels just like this moving fucking target constantly. And so I understand the like frustration, but I think that the idea that your worth as a man or female desire is something to be like captured and like should be easier than it is. Like
That it's like a reward for behaving well.
yes, or that it should be, right? Or that your behavior is rewarded by you then earning me. And like I'm not something to be earned. Just like a man isn't something that like I earn from being a proper woman or like you know what I mean? Like or
Yeah,
being
people
beautiful.
really do
It's
think so.
I know, but it's like this it's this weird anyway, so when we're talking about whether I think females actually like men who aren't good for them in quotes, right? I think that depends on like where they're at, what they know, and like their personal attraction. And I think potentially for me sometimes, okay, we talked about this. Sexuality for every single individual is a lot around mystery, curiosity, novelty.
Mhm.
So, but also when it comes to like relationship chemistry or sparks flying or butterflies, we've talked about this, I think, in past episodes, where like that is either one thing. So it's either that your nervous system sees them as familiar because it reminds you of another relationship in your life. And that's where the like whole Freudian trope that like girls are into their fathers and that whole fuckery. But then there's also if it's either because it's familiar and so your nervous system feels safe, and not because it's healthy for you, but because it's familiar to you, right? And then there's also, so like if your nervous system is familiar to chaos or to toxicity or to the pattern between your mom and your dad or whatever, or your dad and you, whatever it is, right?
Love means like hurt and someone like hurting me.
Yeah.
One of the examples against spanking, just saying, in the long-term research.
Ooh.
No, because you learn like as a kid, you're like, oh, this because like the thing around spanking is like I'm hitting you because I want you to be good and because I love you and I don't want you to make mistakes. That's like what a lot of parents that use spank, like I'm not talking about like spanking like as a tool is like different. I think at least that's what other people say. I personally don't think so. Cut out that part. But you know what I'm saying is that like parents will say, I am doing this to you because I love you and I want you to be good.
Yeah.
And then that like teaches you like, oh, if someone loves me, they're going to hurt me.
Yeah.
So that I'm good.
Hashtag kink development. All right. So either it's because it's familiar or it's because it's novel, mysterious, and like kind of the you know the other side of that coin. Like it's either, and it can be novel and mysterious and familiar to your nervous system, right? They're not like mutually exclusive, but sexuality also has a sense of novelty, which we talk about like in long-term relationships when people are like, my sex life is kind of stagnating or has hit a plateau or has declined, right? A lot of the research and the people who are creating books to help couples with like long-term sexual activity, it's about creating novelty and a sense of curiosity around your partner again. And so when we talk about female desire and whether they like the bad boys or not, and this can, it sometimes female desire is either A, recognizing a familiar pattern in somebody else, Or B is because I think, now this is completely personal and I don't know how I feel about this, but like women sometimes we take on a lot of mental load, right? We're constantly observing, and like sometimes women are addicted to, like, not addicted, but attracted to like a rush, that anxiety butterfly feeling, that oh my gosh. And like sometimes that does, danger and anxiety are very familiar, like very closely related to excitement, and could, this gets into like the 50 Shades of Grey and the Twilight, right? And like, why is Bella really into Edward? Because he's mysterious and he's dangerous. And like, that is also just what makes people sexually attracted to each other, period. Right. And then
a good point.
There's also, you could say the same thing for like men who want a virgin, but also want somebody who's like a freak in the sheets, or whatever the fuck you want to call that. And it's this idea that like sometimes men who say they really like love women and want classy women, will also watch a lot of porn. Like they also want, so they want the sex to be mysterious, right? They want it to be like, oh, you're like not very sexual on the outside, but they also want it to be dangerous, like on the inside. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. And even the other thing that comes up to me, which I know we've talked about in private conversations, and is definitely my own personal experience, is, and that I have observed like through media and talking to other women, I think there's almost this component of like when we're like, why are women attracted to the quote unquote bad guy, or not attracted to the quote unquote nice guy? I think there's a few layers, like you were saying. I think on like a surface level, the attraction to the bad guy, at least for me, is I think there's this idea of like, well, all men are bad and are not going to treat me well. At least he's being upfront about it, right? Like I know he is a dangerous asshole, but he's not tricking me. So it's almost like you're like accepting, like you're like, oh, they can't hurt me as much because I already know what I'm getting myself into. Whereas like with like a nice guy, you're like, oh, they're pretending, right, to be nice and to be this person, but I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop for them to show me their real colors.
Yeah, and I think women are very intuitive, and we're not acknowledging the fact that there is something seedy about a guy who is overly nice to you, because like I said, it means that they're trying to like earn your affection, like it's a reward. And women don't really like being put up on a pedestal that is fake, right? Women love to be admired and appreciated when it's genuine, but we can sniff out somebody who is putting us on a pedestal in order to get their way, because it's not about what we want to them. It's about fulfilling their need. Yeah.
And that's why I think it's like the quote unquote nice guy is because they're not actually a nice guy. It's a ruse to get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Like actual nice guys don't call themselves nice guys.
Yeah. And I will also say, I was kind of like dancing around this and wasn't sure if I was going to say it, but there's this level of like, with women holding all the mental load, sometimes we want somebody who's in power and is going to take charge, even if, like you said, like we know that they're going to be an asshole about it, which we don't always, right? But it's like guys who sleep with more women, right? Even if they're not good at heart, they're more confident about whether it's going to be, there's less of a nervousness. It's less high stakes to hit on me. And like we feel safe in the sense that somebody else, like anxiety is contagious. So if you're anxious to talk to me because you're a nice guy and this is a very high stakes endeavor for you to be talking to me, right? Because you're not used to talking to women because you're a nice guy and women avoid you or whatever the fuck it is, you're not comfortable with it, you have social anxiety, whatever that is, right? Like I feel like I have to do a lot of work I feel like I have to reassure you. I have to be like very emotionally on top of things. It doesn't allow me to relax and feel like somebody else is taking control. Because I'm not going to lie, even though people, I'm not saying that women want to be submissive, but women have a lot of mental load in day-to-day life. Like, we don't talk about, women are constantly worried about whether somebody's going to attack them or somebody's going to say something. Like, we do at times.
I mean, it's almost like
Yeah.
the heart of it is like when you ask men what are they most scared of in dating, and they say rejection.
Yeah.
And women what they're most scared of, and it's like getting murdered. It just is like the stakes are very different. So it's like whenever a man comes across as like you're saying, like confident, assertive, they know what they want, it gives you this sense of like safety and conciseness, even if logically, right? And this goes back to the nervous system thing, right? Maybe logically you're like, oh, I don't know, probably not a good guy, but like it feels safe because they are taking control. Whereas this other side, right, the anxiety, the nervousness, the high stakes, it puts you almost on alert, where you're like, what is going on here? Like, why are you so anxious? It
Yes.
feels uncomfortable, even if maybe it wouldn't be. But I also think this like goes into the idea that what I was saying earlier is I feel like almost when it is so, and like this is a really hot take, and obviously this is a mass generalization, and it's not applicable to all men. But I think when we're looking at this like subset of guys that call themselves nice guys and are like, nice guys finish last, and like, I'm such a good guy, and like girls never want to be with me, right? When we're looking at that specific type of man, it's like I think you really described it well, is like it's because they're almost even more so than the bad guy, seeing women as like a status symbol and something to attain. And that's like they're so nervous and feel so uncomfortable, and it feels so high stakes because like, what does it mean about me as a guy that I can't get these women? And there's like it's still so much about them.
They feel like it's about us. They feel like, because when I, am talking to them, counseling them, whatever it is, it feels like, I would do anything. Like, I'm so caring, I'm so giving, like, I'm so focused on you, and these other people aren't focused on you at all. It's like that you being so focused on me is scary, right? That's a lot of pressure and a lot of burden. It's a lot of pressure, it's a lot of burden, but it's also like, why am I so like important? Like, it feels like I'm a caught bunny. Whenever a kid catches a bunny and they've got like their grips on it because they're scared the bunny's going to go away, like the bunny's freaking out. Whereas if a guy, like, it's so fucked up that I'm comparing us to fucking bunnies right now, but if a guy is like holding the bunny and like, or cats, right? Cats don't like it when you're like holding onto them tightly, trying to make sure they don't get away, versus like cats like to come to you in their own time. And like, if you just keep your lap open and like take it or leave it, like the more you ignore a cat, the more a cat feels like, okay, you're not going to like trap me if I come if I come sit on your lap, right? Like, whereas if you really, really need the cat to acknowledge you, and you're really, really scared the cat doesn't want to be around you, the cat doesn't fucking want to be around you. Your nervous system is so dysregulated and so uncomfortable. Like, I'm not attracted to that. I don't feel safe, right?
Yeah.
And I'm scared that if I get near you, you're going to grab me and never let me go. And like, that is not what I want. I want somebody who, like, no offense, could take it or leave it, so that I can be an autonomous individual human being that has my own wants, needs, and desires. Which is why sometimes, that part.
You better keep all of that in. No, I think it's true. And I think, like, again, to be clear in this conversation, like, obviously this is a very nuanced and complex situation, but I think in like the surface level hot takes is like, I think that is part of a lot of what's going on, and a lot of, like you said, like the attraction and the mystery and not feeling trapped and not feeling like an object to be won.
Yeah. And this all goes down to arousal template stuff, right? And like deep nervous system regulation. And like, I like that we were talking about, you know, kind of logically, no, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But nervous system, right? Our brain is meant to, safety is different to our nervous system than it is in like logical reality. And when we think about what feels good to our nervous system, it makes a little bit, it takes something that feels ass backwards and it goes, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And then on top of this, like kind of baseline, you throw in all these like personal arousal templates, subconscious narratives, you know, the patterns you see in your parents, like all of that other stuff. And it just like adds layers. So
yeah. I also think it would be sad to not hit on this other point that I was thinking, which goes into this, right? Is I think this is almost like, even when we look at like romanticy, right? Which I know you haven't really gotten that into, that I've really fallen down that rabbit hole the last year. And a lot of it is this kind of like there's kind of this trope that the first guy you meet in the series is like blonde and is like a nice, like seems like a nice guy and stuff. And then like she never ends up with him. And then the second guy is like the dark, brooded Mr. Shadow Daddy. And yes, the Shadow Daddy. The girls are giggling right now that know what I'm talking about. But I think that part of that like is highlighting, right? When we're like, okay, why is this like this genre is like booming right now? And like, why, what is that telling us about this experience, like in our real lives? And I think part of that is, and I know I'm sorry, I'm giving too many explanations. I think part of it, what is highlighting that goes into all of this is that in the nice guy trope, or like the good guy trope that you're supposed to want on paper, is that the expectations that they put on you too also almost feels like seeing you as a one-dimensional character that's always good and always does the right thing and is like making them look good. And I think almost this ideal of like the bad boy that chooses you, right? They would burn down the whole world and like throw morals out the door to like take care of you and to like see you as this like complex person that's capable of like bad and good. Is that it's almost like they're seeing you as this more full-formed person that's flawed, and they still like you anyway, right? They still like you anyway. Whereas like you also could go down like this, like the nice guy template is like, well, you should always be being good to get what you want. And so I think there's like also this layer there, which is interesting.
You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of, okay, so it's a two-way street where men, we see this where like men won't put, younger men, okay, won't put on their dating profile that they're conservative. And when women ask them if they're conservative or not, which we can get into a whole nother thing about why younger men feel the need to be more conservative these days. But we're talking like Gen Z, right? Gen Z men, scarily enough, more conservative, and why they don't feel comfortable being open about that is because
they still date liberal women and are putting moderate.
Yeah. So they say themselves, like when I've heard a few like interviews, excerpts where these conservative young men are essentially saying, well, I don't want to date a conservative woman because she has all of these unrealistic expectations of me that fall into traditional gender roles. And liberal women are more like flexible, and I get to be more of a dimensional human being, and I don't have to fall into these characteristics of toxic masculinity as much if I date a woman who identifies as liberal. And therefore, like, I don't want them to know I'm conservative because there's now social consequences for your beliefs, which is ding, ding, ding.
At dinner.
Which is like a whole thing going back to like when we were talking about why we should be talking about this and how we kind of create cancel culture creates societal consequence, like large scale consequences, and involves generalizing. But on an individual level, we should be talking about our disagreements so we can hold, like in rape culture, individual accountability, and there can be individual relationship social consequences, so that if men, you know, frown upon their friends being rapists, that would actually have a better impact than us societally just being like,
this is bad.
Yeah, and like all men suck. It would be better if the men who identify as like the one who isn't the problem will then get up and point to your friends and create social consequences for the problem that exists. But ultimately, conservative men are essentially saying there are less consequences. I don't have to always pay for dinner. Things are more dimensional and equal in a relationship with a liberal woman than a conservative woman. And so it's kind of this idea that, well, isn't that funny? That's how women feel about conservative men, where like, or the good guy, as you're saying, not that they overlap.
Yeah,
But
I think I trust our listeners that they're smart. They're smart enough to know the difference.
yeah, but it's like the expectations, right? The good guy holds these very one-dimensional expectations, and then it's kind of like how traditional gender roles hurt us all.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, this was good. Yeah, I really like this conversation. And I
How
think,
long is it so far?
I don't know, we're probably in a pretty good spot. I love like wrapping or doing this though. I think this is really good. One, obviously it's way easier to because we don't have to like prepare. And it shows people our inside worlds more. And I think it actually adds to our authority that we can just have a conversation. And I also think it's adding into like this, like when we think about like the idea of rewired woman, like right to like change your life, it doesn't always have to be like research heavy and ideas. I think like this is it, right? Like having conversations that change your mind. So on that note, actually, I don't know if I can put you on the spot to think like this, but I would love to like look into the research around this more sometime because I don't know it off the top of my head. But I do know like psychologists and people have talked about, right, whenever like you need to change someone's mind, like facts never work. Like when they look at the like cross-sectional longitudinal studies and we look at like what changes people's minds, right? Like if someone's in a cult, right? How do you get them out of that? It's never facts because our brain is very good at cognitive biases, right? And what's the other one? Do you know what I'm trying to say? I can't think of the other word. Doesn't matter. That we are very good at doubling down on what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I know what you're trying to say. Not just
That's
cognitive
like
bias,
CB.
but like
That's another CB word though.
yeah, it's like it's kind of like bias reinforcement, but where your brain only looks for patterns that support your own narrative.
Yeah, and that you it's like cognitive distortions, right? Like you can believe what you already believe and nothing is going to change your mind.
Yeah.
Right? And like what does change you though is emotions, and I actually do think that's why it's really important wrapping all of this up, right? That's why it's important to talk to people that you disagree with. And even when it's really hard and it's really triggering, I think that's like a skill we all need, is to be able to talk to people that we don't agree with because it helps. But anyway, I guess my question to you is, can you think of a time that even if it didn't change your mind at the moment, a seed was planted that ended up changing your mind about something?
Oh, I can think of so many times.
I love it. I think that actually shows like your intellect. And, I think that's something else to add into this conversation, is that sometimes I think if we're like, oh, if I change my mind, that makes me look dumb, right? Like even like people looking at like people that are still supporting Trump and the people that are leaving, like that voted for Trump and are now denouncing him, and being like, a lot of the problem is like an ego thing, to be like, well, I already did it, so I got to double down.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being like, oh, getting new information in a new point of view, it's like okay to change your mind and like grow. So I think it's really cool you have a lot of that in your life, because it just shows how like you're a very curious person that's like driven by curiosity and like open to changing your mind.
Well, I think that comes from kind of like like it's a double-edged sword. I think people who are more likely to do that are people, well, for me, it's my own personal self-doubt. Like I would never, like I rarely am like, I am objectively true, and that is just the way that it is. Like I have the internal wound of like, oh, well, it's my fault. It must be me. I must be wrong. And that makes me more open to listening. That doesn't mean I'm like gullible and like sway with the wind, even though I in the past have been known to be quite gullible, but I am, I don't have that defensiveness of if I'm wrong, that means I'm a bad person. I kind of have maybe maybe this is fucked. But I have the assumption that like I am wrong and that I should hear people out. But I don't know if that's entirely true because I can be very like
as your friend, I don't think it is. I think that I don't doubt that that is a wound, and it's a wound we share that we've talked about a lot.
okay, so
and I think it's a sign of intelligence though.
Yeah, but it's like that BPD where like people always invalidated my feelings and I was always taught to question my reality and my perception because of how many times when I would tell somebody, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced, this is how I felt. And people would say, that's not true. That's not how that happened. That's wrong. And so because of that, I got that internal, like when I feel something or experience something, I ask myself like, is this just me? Like, am I making it up? Am I crazy? And because of that, I'm like, at least I have that initial defense down where like I'm already ready to like question my own beliefs.
Yeah.
And like that can be useful, but it can also be, it's a work in progress. But I know that a lot of people that have that level of self-awareness of like, I could be wrong, my experience could be negative, like it could just be my perception of things. Like when people use that sentence, like maybe that's just my perception. Those are the people who are like, okay, what's your perception? The reality's somewhere in the middle. Or there are people who like their ego is so bolstered by the idea that like my perception is reality and they cannot move on from that. And like that can be very dangerous. And I think we see it a lot more in men because that's what they're taught, right? They're encouraged from a young age that like, no, you're right. And like, what do you think? And like, they're given that kind of self-confidence. And like, we wonder what the fuck that's like, we wonder why they're not willing to see new things. And it's like, well, you fucking taught them that.
We did it to them. Full circle though, as you're talking, I'm like, wait, this is why we research so much, because we want an objective truth to point to outside of our own perception.
Well, yes. Oh my God.
The research, the science shows I'm not crazy.
Holy shit. Yeah. And then
about my little like 16-year-old self bringing in 10 packets of research papers.
Yeah, I'm not alone in my perception. That is like such important evidence to me. That's why I seek a lot of external validation, is because I just like need to know that, okay, we're getting into too much, but I think we need to break this one off because I'm worried about the editing length.
Okay. I have something to say.
Okay, so a time in which my mind was changed. I think it was emotional. And it wasn't, people weren't intentionally trying to change my mind. It was like a seed planting moment. And it was in college over time. Like I have always been friends with women, but I don't think I always acknowledged kind of, I don't think I always felt welcome or like I belonged in women's spaces. Because when I was younger and I wanted to do womanly things, right? We know, I mean, I guess the listeners don't know, but I have been working through like a deep femininity wound, I guess I would say, where like at a young age, I was like a very feminine child, would like wear all one color, loved the color pink, always wanted to do makeup and do makeovers. And a lot of people in my life either didn't value this, or I vividly remember one of the first times I was wearing eyeshadow and I went over to like a kid down the street's house and like there were only boys, right? Like I grew up with brothers and there were only boys down the street, and I went over to play, like me and my younger brother went over to play at this kid's house. And I'm in like the 5th grade, and their parents look at me and they go, "Are you wearing makeup?" Like with such a negative tone. And I felt so embarrassed to be wearing makeup. And like I grew up then not wearing makeup, right? And like I almost felt like people reacted very negatively to me being feminine, and people were like, you know, that line you hear, like, why are you so dressed up? You know, like all of these
Oh, I
things, like
know.
my femininity is some sort of performance, and I felt like people really didn't value it, and so I kind of got rid of it. Like slowly over time I got rid of it. And when I went to college and I was friends with all these women who,
Not even like your internal stuff, but like even like not listening to like female artists and stuff, right?
yeah, so like
Rejecting of like other women overall.
yes, like I kind of grew into this thing where it's like, oh, that's like silly women stuff. Like I'm a cool girl, right? In quotes, like I'm not like other girls. Like I don't wear makeup and I don't do this. And like I play in the dirt and like I'm willing to like do this. And like that's also probably what led me to drugs, right? Because I'm like, oh, I'm not the girl who's gonna, you know, mooch off your weed. Like I brought my own weed and I brought my own liquor, and like I can hang and I can get down, and like I provide for myself, and like I drive my own car, like very hyper independent, rejecting of femininity. Now, like I didn't hate femininity in other people, but I was kind of like, you know, like that girl who's like, oh, well, like I don't need makeup, or like I don't know. But I was still kind of secretly in awe of these people. So I still had them around me. So in college, when I'm around them, I remember I had these 2 roommates and they were doing their makeup, and I remember them saying something like, "Oh, like, you know, you kind of wouldn't get this." Now, I don't know if I actually heard this or if it was an auditory hallucination or something that I was like paranoid about in my mind, but it was essentially this idea of like, "Oh, like Katrina's ready in like 10 minutes because she doesn't, you know, do anything to get ready, and like we are like bonding over like putting on our makeup and like doing these things and like doing our hair." And I was just like a very like simple, because I hadn't gone through any of that and I had rejected it for so long, and like started to plant seeds in my brain of like women who really loved female artists and really had these women bonding over these things that were ubiquitous to female culture, right? Female experiences. And I found myself like, wow, like I really value that and want that. And I have been rejecting it for so long. And like, that's so sad that I, you know, it just kind of became real and kind of planted the seed in my head of like, why am I rejecting this? And like, what's so bad about it? And how am I contributing to a problem, like a social problem, by essentially like, I didn't look down on people who did it, but I, you know, thought I was superior in some way. I thought it made me more valuable that I didn't, which, as we were talking about with these narratives, is part of the problem, right? If I'm not willing to look at, well, that is looking down on them, right? Oh, that is devaluing femininity. If you are, you know, going to say like, I don't devalue femininity, but then I'm constantly rejecting it. I had to recognize how little of a feminist I was, and how I was like very brainwashed by patriarchal narratives and kind of internalized them, made them a part of me, and why when friends who liked me and were feminine saw that side of me, they were just disappointed. And like, it is disappointing. And so like that, yeah, that changed a lot for me.
That's good. I mean, I think, and obviously you can keep this in or take it out depending on how you feel about it, but I think we should keep it in. I think that's what's really cool about our friendship, is because it's like, while we have so many overlapping core existential problems, it's like how we reacted to life was so on extreme opposite sides, right? Like I think like you look, like people look at me, right, and they're like, you are the like I've told you, like in private conversations, right? Like I've had, and I actually didn't know, like it was not as like conscientious as yours was for sure. Like I've had so many people throughout my life be like, oh, like it's really inspiring to me, or like it's really wild to me how like you show up so hyper feminine, but like you're still successful. And that's really surprising to me. And I think for so much of my life, even being told that in my 20s, I was like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand why people are telling me this. And so it's like really interesting. But that's not even what I was going to share. What I was going to share is almost this like femininity, because I had my own reactions to that. But even in this podcast, right? Like when we talk about like editing and production and like what we want to put out into the world and how we display ourselves, like I think these things come up for both of us, definitely more so for you from what you've shared with me. And that, right, like when we come across really feminine, really excited, like talking really fast, saying like a lot, things that we say to like younger women, that it devalues people's, your perception, right? It devalues people's ability to take you seriously or see you smart or intellectual if you come across like a young woman that's, right, socially we're like, oh, like excited chatter, that's not intellectual. And so it's interesting that as much as you have changed and you are accepting that, there's still this limitation almost of seeing femininity in this really one-dimensional character of like, if you are girlish or like hyper feminine or squeaky or makeup or like, that you can't be smart and taken seriously. I know you don't actually believe that, but that it's like that like core wound pops up.
Well, there's obviously there has to be some part of me that does, right? And it's kind of like growing a new part, acknowledging that part, you know, healing that part. But I can't, you know, I can't say that, like I said, it's still a work in progress. It'll always kind of be something I'm working on. And it's so easy to fall into when I'm around older generations or certain people that I want to impress or people with that old narrative, to be like, yep, like there's a girl I work with who wears like a lot of makeup to the point where like it's very obvious, and like people will talk negatively about it, and she's closer to my age, and then we're kind of like the younger people that we work with, right? And I feel more like internally I can feel the two sides, like one in defense of like, that's so fucked up that you would even consider that as like a part of her character or a tribute, that has nothing to do with how she does her fucking job. Like it doesn't. But then there's the other part of me that's like, why is she doing that? Yeah, like why does she feel that's necessary? Like why is she standing out in that way? Like when she could, you know, blend in and like all that. It's all, so it's, but I have to be able to acknowledge where that comes from, why it exists, what I can do about it. But I do think it's very interesting because I am generally very attracted to people who make me challenge that, right? Like I was always very attracted to you, and there's like a handful of friends that you've met that it's like they very much are like confident in that and fine with that, and like I've kept them for a very long time, and it's like I almost know that I need this sort of like balance in my life, and they like make up for where I lack, but they also teach me about myself. I think all relationships do, but I want to know about what changed your mind.
Yeah,
like your experience. Now that we've talked enough about my
own
direction. deflect.
No, it's good. And I love that that's the example you brought up. I also, you know, like I said, the core existential wounds that bond us, right? We have a lot of similar wounds that played out in very opposite ways. And I love that that's what you brought up. And so I'm going to go tangentially with that same line of thinking, because I was kind of the opposite side of you, right? Is like, I think, how do I show this? Like, I've always been super into makeup and super into dressing up. Like, I remember when I was in elementary school, I would like cut up clothes and like sew my own clothes and wear them to school, and like would kiss my mom on the lips to like get lipstick and be like, mwah. Like I wanted lipstick. Like I've always just been in that like hyper feminine role and love that stuff. And have always been super weird and like intellectual and philosophical, as I've explored a little bit in past episodes.
Keep
Okay,
going.
I think we've brought this up before when we were talking about access to birth control, but I think this is another time to say what's also, I think, undeniable, that you are from California, which I think in general has a more like I don't need makeup, like I'm an easy breezy girl. Because I've heard that from another friendship. I won't name drop her, but I know she got that with me too. And being from Arkansas, and you know, it's a toss up if you consider it Southern or Midwestern culture, but definitely there's still that emphasis on like Southern belle, like how you look. And so I think we can't exclude that from our upbringings. So even though I did get the same messaging that like if you are really dressed up and you have makeup, like you're basically dumb. And so I also constantly got that challenge of like, who are you dressing up for? Like, what are you people being surprised if I would say something smart, or like constantly getting underestimated from like teachers in my science classes, and then like, you know, getting the highest score or outperforming everyone and then being like, huh? Like what? Like you're smart? And so I got that experience, but it's almost like doubled for me. I think I almost doubled down on that. And instead of taking away the makeup and clothes, it's like I actually took like I took away my personality. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, and we've talked about this. I like when I look back and I'm like, where did I start really having the dissociative problems and like really shutting down the spiritual, the psychic, the creative, the artist side of me? It was around like high school, like 14, 15, 8th grade, 9th grade territory. And I realized that's like when I stopped dancing. That's when I stopped. Like I had started an art club and was always like creating fashions. Like everyone in my life when I was a small child thought I was going to be like a fashion designer. I had like 400 notebooks of clothes I designed and that creative part. But instead of like you were like, instead of taking out the outward appearance, I was like, oh, I'm going to be like this, but I'm going to become a scientist. Right. I shut out my creative side because that wouldn't be taken seriously. In my mind, right? I don't actually believe this now, but I'm saying the little kid in me, instead of taking away the makeup and the frills, I was like, oh, I'm not going to be creative because artists don't deserve respect. I'm going to be a scientist. And I went to this like conference summer before 9th grade. That's where I first was introduced to neuroscience as a field. And I was like, huh, this is a way to be interested in people and why they make decisions that they do, and, you know, interesting, but like it's taken seriously. And I look back and I'm like, I definitely was motivated to study neuroscience and become a scientist because I knew that gave me credibility. And to this day, when I tell people I study neuroscience, I get this feeling of elation when they look at me and they say, wow, you must be really smart. Nothing compares to that feeling. But I guess I told that really long story to share.
It was 2 minutes. It was 2 minutes.
It was a really long way to say that. It's funny because I feel like we ultimately had the same problem, but it showed up in really different ways, which we can also see kind of culturally, like being in Arkansas, being in California. And I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna prove I have worth through being intelligent. Right. And stuff. And you did too, but just showing it differently. Anyway, I think in where did that change, which is like the point of the story, is I actually think in college, and I think this is like where we've both been mirrors for each other. In college, I had multiple people I was very close to that were pursuing art and creative endeavors. And I think it took years, like you said, like picking away. It wasn't like one specific moment, but I think being in close relation to people that I really respected and saw as very intellectual, really putting emphasis on their art and creative expression and their whole personality, not just being like, I'm a research-based analytical person. Those close relationships to like Armand, to you, to Nina, like those relationships helped me be like, oh, I actually like I think they're smart and their whole personality isn't just like research and science. And I think that actually gave me a lot of permission to, still not right away, but eventually, like as I went into adulthood and I started breaking down, like I went to school for neuroscience and pre-med, And it started becoming very clear to myself and my advisors and everyone in my life that medical school would not be good for me because it's like very, very structured, very high control, right? Not a lot of critical thinking. I know that could be saucy, but any doctor you talk to will tell you it's true. Like they're having to follow formulas and what insurance tells them to do. They are not like actually using their best knowledge to make decisions a lot of times. Hot take. Anyway, I decided not to do that. And my whole personality fell apart because I had really put in like who I am is tied to like me being smart and being a doctor and being taken seriously through that particular realm. And anyway, I think you guys, like the people that I saw that I really respected and had put a lot into art and creativity and then even going on to pursue that, like really influenced me in a positive way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And I think it's like actually really cool that our experiences almost like mirrored each other in that way.
Yeah, and I do think we do that, but I want to point out to the audience, because we have talked about this a lot in private, that although coming into this, we assumed we were like opposites that thought very similarly, we think almost surprisingly nothing alike. Like we think so differently that we actually, it creates like these fumbly, weird communication moments in our relationship around the podcast and with each other, where it's like, wait, I assumed you thought about this the same way that I did. So why aren't we getting the same answers? And it's like, well, why aren't you getting the answer that I expected you to? Which isn't always the same answer as me, but like I expect it because I think you think this way. And it's like, well, I don't think that way. And it's like, oh my God, holy shit. Like you think way differently than I thought. Anyways, so we are mirrors, but we have completely different paths, completely different perspectives, completely different like logic. And I think sometimes we even get the same end result from going very different ways. And I think that makes our conversations like very dynamic, because we're talking about the same outcome, but we are talking about like a very different journey. And that's super cool.
And I think it even wraps up this whole conversation about the importance of leading with curiosity and talking to people that you don't agree with or do agree with from a place of like trying to understand what their thoughts are and motivations are instead of assuming, right? And I think that even gets into like what we talked about, I think. And it's not to say that it's not true on this like objective philosophical level, right? To be like, if you believe these things, like I'm going back to like politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like almost like the problem with the left and like why we see this like mass exodus of like young men to the right. And like when we're like, why is this happening? And not to say that like this is the only thing, but definitely part of it is being like, oh, like you are a bigoted, racist, horrible person. And while yes, maybe the consequences of those actions might be true, and that might be true in the subjective layer, like we mentioned, that's not the way to change their mind. And instead, if we can be like, well, why are you believing this thing? Right. And even like when we look at personal conversations with people, I was talking to people at dinner last night about this. Someone might be like saying that they're anti-immigration and pro-Trump, or, you know, they don't believe in gay marriage. But then you see like their daughter's husband is like an immigrant, and like they're nice to them and like welcoming, or like they're friends with gay people and like you're okay. And it's like leaning into like that there's cognitive dissonance, which I think is the word we were trying to come up with earlier, that people, when they're humanized, right, they're like, oh, like that's okay, they're the right kind of person. But then in like policies, they say it's bad. And I think that gives us hope because we can dig into like, okay, why is it okay for these certain people, but not on a policy level? And we can actually start to understand what they're thinking. And that's how we can start to change it.
Yeah, I think
it's over. Did that not make sense?
No, that totally made sense. And I just like want to piggyback on that and say, like, I think when we're talking about this mass exodus and kind of approaching conversations with curiosity and being willing to allow people to make mistakes and not assume that they're making mistakes because they're idiots or they're dumb or they're evil or they're bad, but that there is cognitive dissonance and cognitive bias, and there's propaganda bubbles, and there's products of our environment, and there's individual feelings and egos and protective mechanisms and narratives that we are all, piling on top of each other. And kind of when we generalize, we get in very dangerous territory where people don't feel heard. And when people don't feel heard, they don't want to listen. And so this like cancel culture, what I will say is cancel culture, in my mind, the intention is to create social consequences for some of these things that as a society we would like to address, deal with, and make sure that people who, it's kind of like trying to use the same tactics as, the conservative box theory, where it's like, if we are now accepting, right? And that these things are now okay, and that we are going to be open to them, and we are going to, be nice, loving, and radical acceptance, and kind of try to make up for our wrongs. If you don't get in with the program, then fuck you. And that generalization doesn't help the people who are like, well, I'm not allowed to make mistakes. I'm not allowed to be human. I'm not allowed to be multidimensional, right? If I don't say or do the right thing by this subsect of people, then I'm apparently a bigot, an asshole, like I'm a bad person. And so it doesn't create this like curiosity and dialogue, and it doesn't give people dimension that allows us to change their mind or create common ground, which is all people really want, is to connect, I believe. And so I think, cancel culture has the right intention of creating social consequences, but goes about it in the wrong way by generalizing and sometimes making people not feel heard. And you could argue, well, they're not listening to me, and like vice versa, but it's like the chicken and the egg, right? It doesn't really matter which one fucking comes first, but are we going to eat them both or not? Or like, I don't fucking know. That was a really weird way to end that analogy. But it's essentially like, it doesn't matter which one came first. It's what we're going to do about it now. And I think individual conversations and individual consequences are much more important than these overgeneralizing, right? We're going to create consequences for all men and all white men and all white cisgendered men because, I mean, if you think about it, it is taxing to go through all of your individual relationships and have individual accountability. And especially for these vulnerable populations, right? They're not welcome, they don't feel heard, and they don't always have access to these people. So it's up to the people with privilege, up to the people in these circles who say, I'm an ally. Well, if you're an ally, are you holding people socially accountable in your individual relationships, right? Yeah. Like if you're a cis white woman, cis white man, if you're surrounded by other cis white individuals or, a majority population, are you creating social consequences in your relationships are you willing to disagree with people? Are you willing to question people? Are you willing to have these conversations with curiosity and love in your heart? And I think, I've seen some things lately where it's like, ask people your political views at Thanksgiving so you know who to not buy Christmas presents for. And like taking it back to like my husband and his dad, like they're still blood relatives. Like we're not going to just shun him, but it is important that my husband say something like, I'm really disappointed that that's the way you feel. And those don't feel in line with the morals that you taught me as a kid. And I am so about love and so embodied in this acceptance that I still love you as my dad. I still respect you as my elder, but I am going to talk to you about the fact that the way you think, what you're saying right now does not align with who you say you are, what you say you believe in, what you taught me. And because I do believe in those things, I'm not going to just not buy you Christmas presents or cut you out of my life. I'm going to have this conversation with you. And that's the loving thing to do, not to just say, I refuse to be around people who think and feel this way, because they think and feel that way for a reason. And they're just as scared as we are, I think.
Yeah. No, you sum that up so beautifully. And I mean, I know we've talked about this in private. It's something that's really important to both of us. And I think, to be really clear, first of all, we are not condoning like putting yourself in like truly dangerous or emotionally abusive situations. Like, you nuance, right? Don't put yourself in, like, if someone is like actively being like aggressive or harmful or violent to you, like, obviously don't engage with them. But I guess the point of all of this is that just because someone disagrees or maybe on the surface has really violent or negative, harmful ideals and values, that doesn't, like, we're not going to change the world by just cutting off these people and calling them names and saying that they're dumb. And so the more that we can practice, like you were saying, this embodied area of love and genuine curiosity, like, that is how we change people's minds. And even like, if you can, like we've even talked about, and you, like we're saying, it's the best way. And I think it would be great to do like more in-depth research and a thing on this. But from my knowledge and training, right, if we can, reduce the threat, which is really hard when you're like emotionally charged and feeling threatened. But right, if we can kind of validate something that we agree on with them and just kind of neutralize, be like, I'm listening to you, I hear you. And then just like asking questions is in a non-threatening way that can start to kind of make them think differently, right? Instead of telling them like, oh, you're wrong, or like, you're a racist, you're a bigot because you believe these things, or like even the accusation of like, which I'm not saying you're wrong, like it feels really natural, but even being like, oh, this isn't what you taught me, I feel like can feel a little like that, like you think you're better almost, like, to them.
Yeah.
And I know you weren't saying like that, you were just giving examples, but almost if you can ask questions that help them discover that what they're saying isn't in line with what you did, like that can help their brain to start coming to those conclusions for themselves of like where maybe what they're saying doesn't actually align with their values and beliefs. But ultimately, it's all leading with like curiosity and love and expecting kindness and good from people that can diffuse the situation to allow you to actually talk about things. Harder to do than to say.
But this whole thing was about kind of social consequences and like, what does that look like, rather than just isolating these people, right? Yeah. Is like, Greg is going to tell his dad he's disappointed in him, and he's not going to like cut off all contact, at least not now that I know of. But it's like one of those things of like, well, I've told Greg this in the past, like there are certain family members, like I don't want alone with I don't want exposing my kids to like certain ideas, or like I don't want, like if my mom doesn't do this, but if my mom were to, frequently comment on my body or my weight or what I looked like, I would maybe not have her watch my kids alone, where she could say things like that could create narratives to them that I couldn't defend or shut down in the moment. And this is the same with like certain religious beliefs that I feel like, now it's not the religion itself, it's the harmful narratives that come from the way you're teaching spirituality, right? What is valued and important to that religion that I think is problematic, because I don't think spirituality is problematic. I think sometimes like people talk I'm in a lot of 12-step programs, people talk about a loving God versus a punishing God. And like, I don't want narratives about a punishing God, given to my kids. And it's not because you're religious. It's not religious discrimination. It's the narrative, right? And so like, if you hold true to those narratives, which I'm willing to talk to you about, the social consequence is boundaries, limits, maybe less vulnerability from me, You know, like you don't have as intimate of a connection with people that, I don't know, you guys will come up with your own social consequences, but like it would be a really cool conversation to be like, what social consequences are effective, right?
Yeah.
What social consequences are not effective? And like, what is the importance of social consequence?
I think also it's like, but like, what is the end goal too? Right? It's like whenever we're thinking about the social consequences, it's like, what is the goal? Because there's a difference between the end goal being to help change someone's mind to bring them to your side versus like just your peace. Right? Which this all, because this goes back to like, you know, that we're almost to a problem culturally where like a lot of people are really lonely and don't have intimate connections, and it's almost because the expectations we have on other people or to not ever be uncomfortable are so high, where we've gotten to like, well, I don't want to be a burden, I don't want other people to burden me, I don't want to be uncomfortable. And part of being in community is like being burdened and uncomfortable, and to the degree to which that is happening, obviously I'm not saying to put yourself in violent situations, but like you said, like there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. And I think whenever you're thinking about who you're going to spend time with, who you're going to try to have these difficult conversations with, it kind of also depends on what the end goal is for yourself and for them and your relationships with them.
And what state you're in, right? Like I'm not having these conversations because I personally right now can't take it. I'm too emotionally charged and I'm like this close from the fucking edge. So I'm like, I don't know. It's all, I don't know about the political thing, but like, you know, even when it comes to like all the way back to the beginning, like body stuff, right? Like if I have a friend who's constantly talking about dieting or we're talking about clothes or, you know, there's these little things that give keys into like what somebody is really like, what narratives are coming up for them. And like we were able to kind of open up and be like, this is a weird conversation, but like it needs to be had. Like, this is how I feel about my body. I'm like, and like, it doesn't have to be political, right? And we weren't trying to change each other's minds, but it's also just about, you know, how do we, show up in relationship? How do we do the shadow work? How do we, you know, rewire ourselves for the better, learn from each other, learn in relationship, and are able to have deep, intimate conversations that stimulate us and challenge us without it getting like emotionally volatile, feeling like a burden. You know, we talked a lot about how everybody expects you to just like kind of, well, that's for your therapist, and like friends aren't therapy, and like I'm not, and you know, there's this whole thing about like trauma dumping and all this stuff, but like, I don't know, there's a level to which I don't think therapists always existed, because some of it is just built in relationship and our willingness to be vulnerable and open to each other without labeling things and becoming emotionally triggered. And you become less emotionally triggered when you're willing to face what you're working with and be understanding. And I think all of this stuff was kind of related to that.
Yeah, and I think it's like, if you're at the, like sitting at the end of this episode and being like, wow, that was a lot, but also it's inspiring me to think about my closer relationships, and or not even close relationships, just like people you randomly meet out in public and stuff. I think one of the biggest things that's helped me is also just like asking permission or like calling things out. Like I think that's something that's really helped like our relationship, even, is to be like, whoa, this is like feeling really uncomfortable, or this is feeling like really charged, or like, are you in the headspace for me to talk to you about this thing, or like, do you want support or do you want my real opinion? And I think just like having those check-ins in all relationships, that's going to like help this communication, setting boundaries, talking to people you disagree with, getting through emotionally charged situations. And I think if all of us could do that, like we would just be a lot happier individuals and like as a society.
Yeah. And like going back to the beginning, like this also starts with like a relationship with yourself. Yeah.
No, you're right. It all comes down to a regulated nervous system and being self-compassionate and learning how to feel safe in your own body.
Well, I think also because Ooh, geez. I don't think everything comes down to a regulated nervous system, because I think in a society where we are right now, like, I'm dysregulated and there's good reason for that. And for me to try to regulate over kind of the fear that I currently have would be to, it borderlines on that kind of like, what were you calling it? Spiritual.
Bypassing and toxic.
Yeah.
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 Well, I agree. Like, yes. Thank you for clarifying that, because that is true. And right, because this comes down to the whole thing of like, if you're well in an unsick society, like if you're well in a sick society, how can you be well or whatever? And this is something I think about a lot as, someone that helps guide people through like mindfulness and meditation and being happier. It's something I struggle with a lot on a personal level, as you know. So I think it's like, yes, it's like if you are like physically unsafe, telling yourself that you are safe is very, very harmful. And as we've talked about a lot, right? Like our brain and our nervous system, we'll say strictly on the science side, not getting into spirituality, our nervous system and our brain is completely in control of how we are perceiving and experiencing things. And so it's not like, it doesn't have to mean that you're saying that the things outside of you aren't real or aren't actually bad or traumatizing, but we can control how much it affects us in like those daily moments. And like, to me, at least when I talk about regulated nervous system, that's not about never having these extreme reactions, right? Like hyper arousal. So for people that maybe aren't as familiar, right? It's like when we talk about hypo arousal or states of our nervous system, that's like, you're really lethargic, you're really thinking slow, you're maybe having trouble deciding what you want, like you're not hungry typically, like very slow down. And then in hyper arousal, you're very like triggered, you're overthinking, you have trouble making decisions because you have too many thoughts, like racing heart, sweaty palms, like really think. And like those are normal parts of existence, right? So it's not about never having those things, but it's that you're not living in those states of being, because that's really harmful to like your physical and mental well-being. So for me, like when I talk about regulated nervous system, and something I'm working on in myself is like, it's not about saying that these things aren't happening and like lying to yourself and trying to make yourself always be calm, peace, love, and light. But it's that even whenever those moments happen of like hypo or hyper arousal because of like trauma or feeling unsafe, it's that you're not living in that 24/7, and you know how to bring yourself to a place where it's not affecting you so much that like you can't sleep or you can't eat or you're overeating or you can't make decisions. That's what I mean, which is way harder to actually do.
Yeah, I guess I just meant that like lately, I feel angry, I feel depressed, I feel scared, and rather than being like always being like, right, because there are certain times where it is good to, but rather than being like, I need to regulate my nervous system and like focus on gratitude and all that stuff, like obviously there are times and places where those tools are useful, but also regulating my nervous system, which is it still is regulation, but I skipped over that in my head originally of like, I'm allowed to be angry and I need to be angry and I need to feel angry and I need to tell somebody how scared I am and how upset I am, and I need to experience that in order to regulate my nervous system. And kind of like, I just living in like a counseling setting, sometimes I feel like a lot of my job is to kind of satiate these symptoms that I'm like, these symptoms aren't symptoms of something that's wrong with them. It's something that's wrong in society, and they belong and they need to just feel them. And I don't like that I'm like, well, why don't we take some deep breaths? And it's like, no, you're fucking homeless and there's like a housing crisis and it's 20 degrees outside and like this is bullshit, and like fucking scream, man. Like, I don't know.
No, you're totally right. And I think that's where like the nuance of self-care is on a sliding scale of like your physical safety needs have to be met first.
Mhm.
And so, like, for our audience, though, I'm going to guess, right? A lot of our audience, like, probably has basic physical needs met.
I mean, you at least have a phone because you're listening to us
Listening
on
to
some sort of like
Right. So
technological
there's some
device.
kind of access. Yeah. And so it varies. But yeah, to your point, like regulating your nervous system can look like getting the anger out of your body, right? Hitting a pillow, screaming. And yeah, it's like more, you don't want that to like live in your body if you can help it, right? Like obviously, if you're living in a war zone or you are homeless or you're have these really extreme negative experiences, it could be harmful to try to feel safe and good in your body. And I think this is where things get complicated, right? Because I think it's also just like how this is kind of going off topic, but I feel like it's important because like I think about this all the time, right? Like I feel like this is like this is my number one struggle of like continuing to live, right? Is that it feels like you're consenting to me. I should say to my personal experience. This is something I struggle with is I feel like I'm consenting to living by living. Well, we're getting dark. By living, I'm consenting that I think it's okay for the world to be this bad. And like if I try to make my life good, right? If I try to be successful or achieve things despite things being really bad for other people, that I'm consenting to thinking that's okay. And I think a lot of people have that wound, right? When we look at like money wounds and wealth wounds, a lot of us get into the territory of like, it's bad for me to have any level of wealth or safety in how much money I make because that means that I'm taking it from other people. So we're going down some real things there, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think there is nuance to the life situation that you have and that not letting the fear or the anger of other things happening keep you from also feeling like joy and happiness in your life. Or like that makes sense.
Yeah, what you said hit me like a Mack truck. Like it hit me so fucking hard because I've been wondering why lately I have kind of dove into this another level of dissatisfaction. Okay, I'm chain smoking. I'm having these cravings and I'm like talking to everyone about them and like, you know, I'm feeling very depressed about the state of the world. And it's that idea of like, I don't want to live in a place where this exists and I'm between two things, right? Like I have everything I need to be content and satisfied, but if I am content and satisfied when all of this is happening, what kind of fucking person does that make me? And then is it my job? Should I just give it all up to go fight for something? Like, is that realistic for me? Is that healthy for my nervous? Is like, I just feel so torn that I just want to give the fuck up. And you're right. It's that idea of like, I don't deserve any of this when not like when I'm not doing anything to give it to other people. And like, it has really made me not want kids lately. Like, I don't feel like I deserve the happiness of a complete whole family when like, I'm like shaking right now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, that it just hit really, really hard. And I think that a lot of people feel this like level of hopelessness. And then there's the other side of like me feeling this way isn't productive for them. And I also feel a little bit guilty because like I'm not in that situation. So how dare I feel all these big fucking feelings when like I have it so fucking good in comparison? Like who am I? You know, and then it goes back to like the guilt of being not in a horrible, horrible situation when there are millions, hundreds of thousands of people who are it's just existing despite cruelty is important and difficult and confusing. And like, I am definitely feeling that right now. And I feel like probably a lot of people are. So I'm really, really glad you put that into words that helped me understand, not that it takes any of it away, but just helped me feel seen, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it was in a way that like translated in language. And I think I would say that's, something that I've so deeply struggled with my whole life. And like when you go back to our first couple episodes and we were talking a lot about suicidal ideation and stuff. And for me personally, this is where a lot of it stemmed from, at least in the like logical sense, where I struggled because I had this crushing sense of hopelessness and depressive thinking from a very early age. And I, for some reason, was just hyper aware that I didn't deserve anything I had. And that most people around the world in other countries were living in unfair conditions, which that thinking has its own problematic thing, I want to say. But for my child thinking, that is what I thought. And then I felt like I didn't deserve, like, but then I would feel guilty for feeling guilty because my life on paper was good. And then that would make me more depressed. And so anyway, I think the whole point of sharing all this, and, listeners, let us know if this was helpful for you. I'm going to take a guess that it is, because I think a lot of us feel this way and don't know how to talk about it with other people. I think when I talk about it in private conversations, people often tell me that it feels really good to talk about it because they've never talked about it before. And I think in my role as a mindfulness guide, spiritual life coach, whatever, and I want to be really transparent in my personal life, I've taken a step back in those things because I've also been struggling with this myself. But I do feel like I'm getting back to the place where I want to, and that it's ultimately coming down to joy is the ultimate form of resistance. And that it's like there's a couple different levels here. On the neuroscience side, right? We even talked about this, I think maybe in the intuition episode, maybe something else. But like on a neuroscience side, we actually can't feel fear and joy at the same time. So the more we can cultivate feelings of joy, physiologically, we are helping our body, right? And like, I think that's even like the Portland thing that happened a few months ago where people were showing up to stand against like ICE in the frog blow up outfits and stuff, and like creating moments of like joy and hilariousness in something that is actually destructive and horrible is like the ultimate thing we can do, because they can't take our joy from us.
Yeah, it oscillates so much for me that like I'm either completely there or I'm completely here. And like that is a part of like this all goes back to nervous system regulation, where I need to have points where I fully feel this, and then I can, like I need the ebbs and flows of this whole experience, because I feel like I would be one-dimensional, or I wouldn't feel like I'm fully grasping everything if I lived on either spectrum. Like that is where it gets into unproductivity, is if I stay in one of those areas for too long. And I find that only when I'm down here in like this fear area do I get really mad at people, cough cough, my husband, who can be more like in the middle and like doesn't show me, even if it does happen, that he's like really sunk down, like he's either in joy or like, but I'm sure it does happen, and he's just like not, like me, like a weeping sorrow. Like I take it out on everyone around me, where I'm just like fucking mad and I'm depressed. And anyways.
Yeah. Well, it's important. It's important to feel our feelings. I guess my whole point with sharing all of that is that getting stuck there isn't helping anybody. But anyway, I think I personally really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually the perfect point to add, if you don't mind. I think like acknowledging, like off of what you were just saying, like that is why, we took this like random, really long break around the podcast and productivity, because both of us have been having our own kind of like mental health and catastrophizing experiences. I guess I shouldn't say that for you, but for me, I did have a month I was like really, really, really struggling. And I think both of us, through our own conversations privately, we've talked about the part of what we are wanting to creating with this podcast is helping people learn how to live a life that they want to, right? They're having more control over how they're existing and how they're feeling, and using the information that's been done through research and through traditional knowledge and spiritual outtakes or outlooks to live a life that they feel good about, right? In alignment with their values and themselves. So anyway, part of what we've done by taking this break and kind of resetting of what we want is also not pushing ourselves to produce something when it feels out of alignment with what we're needing, and still showing up whenever things are hard, like finding that balance.
Yeah. And I think we got to this point, specifically for me, where when we're creating this in society, I carry so many of those narratives and those societal views into this that I was like very, there has to be deadlines and there has to be consistency and there has to be all these things that we tell ourselves makes things successful. And the entire point of this podcast is to not be so rigid. We're women and we don't have the same day every day like men. And so we don't have to every week put something out to prove that we are intelligent and consistent and productive and deserve success. We can just, it's supposed to be fun. We're supposed to like having these conversations, and we don't have to do it if we can't show up as our best. And like, we are relying on our audience to respect us leading by example and like honoring ourselves and what feels right for us, and not like being like, oh, like they're so wishy-washy and they're so inconsistent. Like, that is how humans are. And that's how we're going to show up in our podcast. And like, we are going to put forth content as it is created, and we're not going to force any content to be made. And we think that that will lend itself to quality and to authenticity and to supporting, like you said, this idea that productivity and success don't have to be what we're told they are. I don't have to push myself to create something when it's not in alignment with me. And we can be successful without killing myself. Like, I don't have to, I don't have to swim upstream. I can float. I can take a break. I can rest. We can put it out on a Thursday. We can put it out on a Tuesday. And like, follow us so you get the notifications of when it comes out, because we don't fucking know.
Hit that plus button, subscribe, follow button. Oh yeah, I love that. And I am just really happy with this. And I, like we talked about, I think just this experience together has, I think already just in the 3 months we've been doing this, I personally feel like my personal growth has exploded, because there is nothing like exploring and pushing your boundaries of what you're comfortable with, like starting a business with your friend and seeing all the ways you didn't actually know each other before, what you think is normal and not normal, and pushing through that and showing up and like having the benefit of the doubt for each other. And both of us tend to take things very negatively. So I think even like being like, oh, like this isn't about me, this is about her. Or like, or seeing where I can show up differently and seeing my own things. Cause like I'll just put it out there for our listeners right now. I'm on the extreme side of this whole like lackadaisical, what happens. I really struggle with consistency. And I think something I've worked on a lot, almost like a lot of people outside would say bad, right? Of that, like I've really gotten an extreme level of being okay with being inconsistent. And for me, that feels a lot more aligned, which is like how I think, because even my entire life I've been like that, which now I attribute to ADHD, right? As like I have hyper productive streaks where I get a lot done in like 3 days and then I want to do nothing for 2 weeks. And that works for me. That's very different than how you operate. So I think it's like trying to find those middle grounds has been really, really helpful to me for sure.
Well, I actually relate a lot to that, but I was so shunned and devalued because of that. Cause like I would start things and then never finish them. And I was always like really reprimanded for that and really told that like I was never going to be successful and I was never going to make it in things because I lacked what we define as consistency. But I think like we could argue that that definition serves a certain population of people and not other people, and that we are not actually inconsistent. We're just not in alignment with that same definition that everybody else holds. We'll find balance sometime, but thanks for coming with us.
Yeah, this is really fun.